Number 13, unlucky 13, the Mayflower Compact, the charter establishing the Virginia House of Burgesses and the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. All of those famous documents from the colonial period. Okay, so real quick, let's brain dump. Mayflower Compact, that's 1620. That's the Pilgrims coming over, obviously on the Mayflower. And that document, if you remember, was the first agreement to self-govern. In other words, we can make the rules ourselves. We don't need input from the king. The Virginia House of Burgesses. This is the first representative assembly in the New World. So the first time people are going to elect their own representatives to make their laws for them. Kind of the precursor to our modern day Congress. And then the last one here, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. We just talked about that. Thomas Hooker. And this is the first written constitution, which is a set of rules on how a society should run. Okay, so we know what all three of those things are. It says which factor most contributed. By the way, if you had to sum these three things up and say, okay, what do these have in common? You could just use the phrase self-government. We're going to agree to govern ourselves. This is the first time we are governing ourselves, and this is the first time that we wrote a document that is going to govern ourselves. So all three of those things are the colonists and self-government. Okay? So which factor most contributed, so what cause, you could say, factor is like a cause, most contributed to the creation of the documents on this list, in this list. So in other words, what was the cause that most contributed to these documents that we just talked about? A says the opportunity for trade with American Indians. Does that have anything to do with self-government, to do with representative assemblies or anything like that? Would you need these documents in order to trade with American Indians? Absolutely not. This is one that you can throw out right away. It doesn't have anything to do with it. B says the distance of the colonies. Okay, so we got our colonies there. That matches up from Great Britain. Now we talked about how it was about a 2 to 3 month boat ride to get a message across from Great Britain all the way over to the colonies. There's no email, there's no text messages, there's no Snapchat back then. So if you're going to make rules and laws, it's going to take a long time for those to get over to the other side of the world. And you're not going to really have the opportunity to make sure that they're even following those laws. So lots of communication time. That kind of makes some sense of why the colonists might need to make their own rules. It took a long time for communication. We'll come back to that and make sure that that might be the right one. Okay, C says the doctrine. So a doctrine is a belief system of the Church of England. Now, if you remember anything about the Church of England, you remember it's basically Catholicism, but instead of a pope, it's the king at the top. Remember, it started with King Henry VIII. He wanted to get a divorce so he could get a younger wife. Pope said no, so he said, forget you, I'm just going to start my own church. So, at the end of the day, the king is the one making all the rules in the Church of England, right? The people are not making their own rules. So if that's their belief system, why would the colonists be making their own rules? Now, if these were based off the doctrine of the Church of England, it would be the king making the rules. So that one is not going to be our answer. And then economic, again, that means money. Draw a dollar sign. The economic system of mercantilism. Remember, that's controlling trade. That's European powers making colonies. Right? So, yeah, I mean, that does have to do with the colonists. That does have to do with England coming over and making colonies. But again, if that is the reason, then you would see the king being the one to make all the laws, not the people living or the people on the Mayflower making their own laws, or the people living in Virginia making their own laws, or the people in Connecticut making their own laws and self-governing. That does not really make sense with the three documents that we've learned here. So the number one factor, the number one cause of why we had to make these documents to govern ourselves is because we were so far away from Great Britain that by the time their communications got here, we would have been long gone doing something else. And so we started to make our own rules, our own laws, and that's really why it got going and how it got going.